Welcome to Tibettv. For this episode of In Conversation with Tibettv, we have Sriparna Pathak, a professor of China Studies and the founding director of the Center for Northeast Asian Studies at Jindal Global University. Professor Pathak's interest in China Studies was sparked by her interaction with a local Tibetan shopkeeper in McLeodganj some 20 years ago. Welcome to the program, Professor.
Thank you so much for having me here, and it's always refreshing to be back. It's like reliving my past life from 20 years ago. Thank you so much for having me here.
Right. So let us dig right into today's discussion. As an expert on China studies, can you talk about the psychological warfare that China continues to play with India and the rest of the world in context to Tibet and the Tibetan people? And tell me, how effective is that tactic?
Right. So, see, China employs psychological warfare in Tibet, promotes certain narratives across the world. Semantics matter to China, words, nomenclatures. So, even from 1950 onwards, they have termed the occupation of Tibet as peaceful liberation. Right. They could have just said liberation. Why peaceful liberation, right? So, that's something to think over and over and over again. It's like basically saying a lie 100 times to make it sound like the truth. Or say they have this concept of Chinese Buddhism now. Okay, fair enough, whatever that means. Coming to India, they keep trying to rename places in Arunachal Pradesh, which they call as Zangnan or Southern Tibet. They've done it multiple times, renaming, flaring up from time to time when there is any sort of interaction between Prime Minister Modi and His Holiness, the Dalai Lama. All these are sorts of very tacitly pushing forward their narrative. They employ the media and unfortunately academic freedom to push this sort of a narrative. How effective has this been in India? Well, India or the Indian government really will not get persuaded by this. But that doesn't mean that China doesn't keep trying. Even this year, just before His Holiness's 90th birthday, they had invited a bunch of very credible journalists to Tibet, which they now call Xizang. Why do they call it Xizang? All of a sudden, from the last 3 to 4 years ago, there is some sort of strategy to this. Okay, and they called our journalists, Indian journalists, to Tibet and gave them a script, of course, and said, this is Xizang and you should talk about the development which you see. Pushing forward Tibet as a development model for the developing world so that China can have the leadership. That's, one of the birds which it wants to kill with the stone. The other bird is erasing Tibet's identity completely by calling it Xizang. Right? Now, here's another challenge for India. The moment you call Tibet Xizang, in Chinese it means Western Treasure Trove. Just south to it would be, well, the southern part of it, or Zangnan. So it has a long-term effect. Or if you use their AI, their DeepSeek, ask them about, name the states in India. No answer, error 404, right? So all of this is going on in tandem. One needs to see the linkages. That psychological warfare is going on. The effort is to say a lie 100 times so that it starts becoming the truth. Unfortunately, in a lot of different parts of the world, people are lapping up the narrative. But I doubt in India, people are actually, especially the government and responsible, parts of the Indian civil society. I don't think it's cutting too much of ice because China has attacked India way too many times to have that sort of trust in anything.
Yeah, right. So going back to when you said peaceful liberation, there is historical evidence that shows that Tibet was an independent state, and then China's coming in 1949 and 50 and actually disrupting the peace we already have, and then peaceful liberation, the word makes no sense, right? So a major psychological narrative that China is pushing forward right now is getting the world to use the word Xizang while referring to Tibet, right? So Xizang, in its literal translation, as you said, means Western Treasure Trove. And in one of your interviews, you've also said that with this claim, the region down south automatically becomes Southern Tibet, and that is Arunachal Pradesh of India. So can you elaborate a bit more on that, and how big of a security threat is that for India?
It's a huge security threat. And look, when they do these sorts of things, any sort of physical aggression, Yangtze Valley clash just happened a few years ago. But they want to also push the border forward, bleeding by 1,000 cuts, by slowly naming and then saying that this is actually ours. If you look at the Galwan Valley clash, right? Galwan is Galwan. But if you look at the Chinese narrative, Chinese media, or even them, making statements in English, they have transliterated Galwan into Chalawan. What is Chalawan? Doesn't even make any sense, you know. It's just a transliteration, but that's just to show that, look, this territory was always ours, which is why we have a word for it in our language. Now, unfortunately for India, we are not, or our foreign policy hasn't been that malicious. No one really thought that, yeah, they're going to come in and rename all our territories, and this is like a long-term move. If you tie this with some historical precedents, you know, even back in the day when India had told in the 1950s to Zhou Enlai that let's resolve the boundary dispute once and for all, he had also said let's do it sometime in the future, the time would be ripe, right? Pushed it away. They needed the time to keep pushing this narrative and the psychological warfare and slowly, you know, increasing their incursions in all formats. Even this year, when our Defence Minister Rajnath Singh had raised the same thing, let's resolve the boundary dispute. You know, you've been saying it in the 1950s, this is 2025. They said the same thing. Oh, it will be resolved at some future time. What is the future? They need those many years to very tacitly keep pushing this narrative to the point that people just completely forget. Is the Indian, you know, government actually forgetting? I'll just give you 2 to 3, maybe 4 examples. I think this year in May 2025, India's MEA spokesperson, Randhir Jaiswal, he said that we have noticed China is persisting with its vain and preposterous attempts to name the places in Indian state of Arunachal Pradesh, consistent with our principal position. We reject these claims categorically. So, call them out, reiterated it's Arunachal Pradesh. Then in January, if we go back a little further, at the Army Day press conference, General Dwivedi also spoke about the LAC, and he talked about how the integrated battle groups are tailored for mountainous terrain in Arunachal Pradesh. It's not buying their narrative and logic. If they are going to propagate it, so we will keep saying the truth 100 times. Pema Khandu, our Chief Minister of Arunachal Pradesh, he attended the celebrations of you know, around Dalai Lama's, His Holiness's birthday. He asserted we share the border with Tibet only. He used the word Tibet. He didn't say Xizang, China, and all of those things. There are ample number of MEA press statements and briefings right from, you know, 2014 onwards, which say Arunachal Pradesh is India. So these illegal claims are nothing but that. But China's thing is the energy which it has and the long-term planning. It's going to keep doing it. I think the world and especially India just needs to pull up the socks, and what we've been doing so far, we have to do it for the rest of eternity.
Right. So speaking of all these meetings with China, in August at the SCO summit, that is the Shanghai Cooperation Organization summit, Prime Minister Narendra Modi said India is committed to improving ties with China. Do you think that comment hold any substance given the fact that Prime Minister Modi's visit to China is almost around 7 years later?
So unfortunately, a lot of different things in geopolitics have been happening this year. India's trusted friend, the United States of America, without any rhyme or reason, backstabbed India. And there was this very viral photo of him hosting a military dictator of Pakistan in the White House. So if they engage in optics, there will be optics from India's side also. So also one more thing was that it was pertinent to go to the SCO summit because Vladimir Putin and Russia is a friend to India, again because of historical reasons. He had invited Prime Minister Modi. Also, within the SCO, India needed to find out which countries can we sell our exports to, the ones which US is refusing to take for heavens knows whatever illogical reason. But that being said, Prime Minister Modi has emphasized 3 mutuals. He's done it repeatedly as the foundation for India-China relations. While he said that we want to improve ties with China, he also said it is pertinent that there have to be 3 mutuals between India and China. Basically, he meant mutual trust, mutual respect, and mutual sensitivity. He has said it twice. Last year, when he met Xi Jinping in Kazan in Russia, he mentioned the 3 mutuals. Again this year in Tianjin, he said 3 mutuals. The fact is he is saying it straight to Xi Jinping. It's not through any intermediary, which means that we don't have these 3 mutuals, which is why there is no improvement. You know, diplomats and heads of states at times, when we have power differentials, we say things, but at the same time, the real message will be one line after that. 3 mutuals otherwise won't be said twice, and that too straight to his face, and saying that we need respect, trust, and sensitivity. Basically meaning border, trust which they have eroded, constantly supporting all sorts of malicious actors in India's neighborhood, and respect. There is zero respect from China's side for India. So, yeah, India would want the best of relations with every country in the world, including that state sponsor of terrorism, Pakistan. Because, India's philosophy is Vasudeva Kutumbakam, or the world is one family. But if actors don't want to be in a peaceful family, well, then they will get what they want.
So going further, a little further on the respect and trust, mutual respect, with all these BRI projects, and then there's also China's Shaokang villages, and then these mega dam projects, right? So do you think there's scope of genuine friendship between India and China, or at least a cordial relationship? And also, how is India managing this relationship while being hospitable to Tibetans?
Right. I'll first answer the part on, how is it managing the part with Tibetans, because, His Holiness the Dalai Lama has also reiterated multiple times that the relationship between India and Tibet is not just transactional. It's it's a history, it's culture, it's religious, it's a lot of linkages. China detests the fact that the CTA is in India. They detest the fact that His Holiness the Dalai Lama is here. But that hasn't prevented Prime Minister Modi to constantly keep wishing His Holiness the Dalai Lama. He did it in 2021. That was the first public wish as Prime Minister. He spoke on the phone, he tweeted. China flared up, of course. But that didn't prevent Prime Minister Modi the next year as well. Did it again in 2022, 2023, 2024, 2025. Every time China keeps flaring up. India is like, okay, keep screaming. Does not really matter, because in democracies, we are free to wish whoever we want to. And if it's someone's birthday, that to a revered person like His Holiness, why not? Before 2021, here's the thing. Prime Minister Modi had not done these public birthday wishes. But there is a change, which is why this has happened, right? So that's one thing. This year in November, India did this big Prachand Prahar exercise in Arunachal Pradesh, while all these narratives of a thaw in India-China relations are going on. Question is, if there's really a thaw, why did we have to do the Prachand Prahar? It shows India's military capabilities. Also, the Nyoma base got activated on November 13, army preparedness. There is zero trust at all. It's just that India has a military power differential with the PRC. And right now we have a particular friend about who we don't really know. What does he want? Does he want a G2 with the PRC, as he has written on his Truth Social? No one really knows what does he really want. So India has to act in tandem with the prevailing capabilities. Doesn't mean India is going to backtrack on sovereignty. Doesn't mean India is going to take any sort of bullying on economics. Piyush Goyal ji, our Commerce Minister, has also lambasted China constantly again and again for their trade policies and so on. The army is fully prepared. So while this thaw actually is being promulgated, especially by the PRC, so as to divide whatever bonhomie is there between India and Tibetans on one hand, India and the West on the other, it's not really cutting ice, because India is doing things. Actions speak louder than words, and India is doing all of those actions. Yeah, their Shaokang villages are there. They're building constantly. India is building its Vibrant Villages program. So I think even this year, there have been hundreds of projects which have been sanctioned. They are ongoing. Full upgrades are, yes, still in progress, because, yes, India was a bit too naive maybe in the first few decades after independence to trust a malicious actor like the PRC. India, for maybe strategic reasons, maybe friendship with China reasons, never batted an eyelid on Tibet. But this aggression is never ending from the PRC. India remains the most attacked country in the world by the PRC across realms. So India is also preparing. India, okay, you want your Shaokang villages, you will have Vibrant Villages from India's side. I think in 2025, about 6,900 crore rupees worth of investments in additional borders, planning development of about 2,000 more border villages is ongoing. So it's going on, because earlier we might have been like, okay, let's be friends. But now, well, we'll adopt China's strategy then. You want to bring it on then.
Right. So now at His Holiness's 90th birthday, he has said the 15th Dalai Lama will be born in a free nation. So if that happens to be India, Will India have to change their stance on Tibet, or how will that dynamic change with China?
I think India is not going to change the stance on Tibet. Not now, when India is close to being the third largest economy.
Right.
When India is seen as the most credible actor, because both the first two, most powerful countries, US and China, are, well, not trustworthy. They are malicious economic predators. India is not. If India had to do it, it would have done it earlier, especially when we were reeling under the whole hangover of bhai bhai and all of those things. But right now, doing it is a loss of face for India and also loss of trust. I think this year also, again, China flared up. His Holiness's Dalai Lama's birthday, 90th. Oh, we will go by our own standards, okay, just the way they have their own Panchen Lama, there will be the Chinese Dalai Lama and so on. India just gave statements in one sentence, and our I love our diplomats for this. Our statements are very dry, but underneath it is the real meaning. India said that, well, we are there are religious freedoms in India. Which basically meant if you do 2 plus 2, yeah, there are religious freedoms in India. Buddhists are a religious grouping in India. They may be Tibetan, they may be Indian, whatever they want to. They have the right to freedom of religion. They will choose whoever they want to. One dry line, but this is the thing. Otherwise, India just could have stayed silent, not said anything. So I don't think that rethinking is going to happen. But yes, here's what's going to happen, unfortunately, when the unfortunate time of the fortunate yet unfortunate time of reincarnation actually comes. China will flare up more. China will have its Dalai Lama. There will be one chosen by the Tibetans, by the religious cultural practices in line with Tibetan freedoms. India will agree to it, accept to it, doesn't really change anything. There is right to religion in India. But China will flare up more. They will attack more. Their incursions into Indian territory will just increase. They will become more rancid. They will become more vitriolic in their statements. But India is prepared for that. It's okay. If we've survived this long, there is nothing which is going to pull us back from here on. So I don't think the policy is going to change. If anything, India might just become more prepared for further attacks using this whole Xizang card, Chinese imaginary card.
So that brings me to the next question. And also, I asked this question directly or indirectly to most of my guests that we invite here to speak on Tibet, India and China relations. I would like to ask you the same. What is the right thing for India and the world to do with Tibet, if it is to stand with the right side of the history and genuinely help Tibet? How can and should India do it without losing their political and economic power?
Right. So I think so far, well, what India has done has been good enough. It cannot be written off, given that there is a military power differential, yet India has not bowed down. India has not caved in, unlike a lot of Western countries, which are so indebted to China economically that no one even talks about the Tibetan cause anymore. One example could be Switzerland. India was the first chosen destination by His Holiness and the Tibetan Buddhists. The second destination was Switzerland. But how often do the Swiss actually talk about it? And unfortunately, while Xinjiang keeps coming up once in a while about these discussions, unfortunately in my travels abroad, I don't hear about Tibet anymore. Yeah, Indian civil society keeps raking it up. But there is a need that others need to do their bit, because otherwise it's just going to become, oh, India is fighting for the Tibetans, It's a global concern. The West has always been talking about human rights. But why the silence, Is it so easy for Chinese money to buy them out? So where are the values, right? India doesn't preach human rights values, because Indian style is to do things and not claim credit for it and to keep advertising it and so on. So I think the world needs to also be prepared that there is going to be this one time where China will choose its Dalai Lama. Will the world forget about the Tibetan cause? Will they accept, the Chinese Dalai Lama? No one's thinking about it. In Indian circles, it's still being discussed. There are quite a few events which are happening. People are also, Pema Khandu has actually made the statement. But where is this from the others? So I think to be on the right side of history, this conversation needs to be restarted again. There are so many colonial boarding schools in Tibet. Why is the West not even calling it colonial? I understand they themselves are guilty of colonization. which increases their responsibility to ensure that that ghastly error which happened never gets repeated for any other country or civilization or population. There is a need for them to call out colonization as colonization, you know. And kids, come on, kids are kids, they're not grown-ups, okay? Them being forcibly assimilated. In India, at least, you'll see a lot of scope for learning Tibetan. What are the others doing? Why is there silence, you know? Indian civil society can rake it up, but then there'll be a pushback from China-funded European or Western American, sections of the civil society. India's headache. But this is a global cause. So I think the world needs to start talking about how it needs to stand by the Tibetans and how it does not need to forget. It's not a fad. Today it's in fashion. Let's talk about it. Yeah, okay, we talked about till 1970s and 80s and 2000s, but now we will just stay silent. It's not a fad. It's not a passing fad. So I think that needs to be done. I wish I had better solutions. I wish I knew how to invoke the cause better. But I think it's high time now. 90th birthday of His Holiness has just passed this year. This conversation somehow has to be restarted.
Right. So as you said, Tibet is a global concern, and then China trying to eradicate the Tibetan identity from all aspects, be it the language sinicization or the colonial boarding schools, and then construction of dams, which has a lot of ecological damages, not just in Tibet, but to the downstream countries and all of Southeast Asia. So what do you think will it take for the international community to finally stand united and speak up against China? I know there's a lot of economic and military power at play, but
I think I think again, civil society has to do its bit, because governments can be bought out by Chinese money. Civil society can't be bought out. In fact, even in the most economically influenced countries, Cambodia, Laos, or even Central Asia, you will see that the civil society is still pushing back against why are their governments actually just kowtowing to the PRC and Xi Jinping, the great so-called emperor, you know. So I think civil society needs to be resorted to, because only once this discourse starts or restarts, through whatever means, it can be done. You know, in Stockholm, there is the Institute of ISDP, and they've done some great work about on basically how weather modification systems in Tibet is going to cause a whole new, it's going to open up a whole new bad Pandora's box, because there's going to be a downstream effect on countries below. India is going to take the first hit. Yes, of course. Okay, India has been talking about this humongous dam which is being built, because it means a direct threat to India's Brahmaputra, Yarlung Sangpo in Tibet and Brahmaputra downstream. But what about the other South Asian countries? China has them in control. Nepal, where there's also a very significant Tibetan population regularly deported. Again, Nepal it has a new government now. One has to wait and find out. But maybe the civil society needs to start talking again. Bangladesh, the lesser said, the better. Well, for whatever different reasons, there is a persecution of Hindus and Buddhists in Bangladesh. Again, that country is also in China's pockets. So you see how everything gets tied. But the civil society has to start pushing. While democracy has its cons, democracy also has its pros. China uses its state media and its little pinks to push out these narratives, and there's tales about Xizang and great development, great power, great example for developing countries and global south and all of that. But it doesn't have the civil society freedoms. That's why they're using the state-controlled media. But other free countries of the world have civil society. So I think there needs to be more research. I know that the CTA does excellent research, but how can this excellent research be taken forward is something which civilians from other countries should also be thinking about. Maybe also starting to see Tibetan studies as being separate from China studies, because otherwise we are playing into the same sort of thing, Increasing the scope for Tibetan language training in other schools. Yes, Chinese language is very much the flavor of the season, and every second person wants to learn Chinese. Not in India, fortunately or unfortunately, but that's the thing. Everyone wants to do business in China. Why not Tibetan, right? So those things need to be figured out, and those things need to be activated, and those things have to be started. And if we can show with evidence as to how weather modification systems create havoc downstream. If South Asian countries minus India are not talking about it, maybe there can be engagements between, say, India and Southeast Asian countries, the ones who are willing to talk about it, right? So novel ideas will have to be thought, because look, the PRC is going to increase its influence through its economic tentacles. But one does not need to forget that everything, economy, politics, geopolitics, culture, diplomacy, military, people, everything is interconnected.
Right.
So,
Right. So, Professor, as my final question, as an expert on China studies and as someone who has been in China and lived in China, what do you think of the Chinese government themselves? Are there any internal conflicts? Are people agitated and wanting for another government or another system of democracy?
see, there's a, in the ways that we are brought up, that plays a very important role. What do I mean by this? See, when, their October 1st happens, their Liberation Day, again, this term liberation, why don't they use the word independence, right? Colonial countries use the term independence, but China calls it liberation, a very Marxist term. Semantics matter. When they have their Liberation Day every year, kids as young as 3 or 4 have to learn Xi Jinping's speech and memorize it by heart and then go and say it in school. Okay. If you don't do it, there are repercussions. 3-year-old, 4-year-old child doesn't even know what a country is, for that matter, Those difficult words in Chinese, well, Chinese is their mother tongue, difficult words. As you move up, you learn more words, right? A 4-year-old child can't do that, but it is compulsory. This concept of there's only one way, and that is Xi Jinping way, is ingrained into them right from the beginning, right from childhood, which is why the possibilities for dissent are completely removed. Yes, there are dissidents from the PRC who have stood up, but not too many, as you would see in democracies, right? So that is drilled into them. That being said, when it is a do or die situation, as happened during COVID-19, there was the white paper movement. Because again, it was a do or die. Again, it started with Xinjiang because there was this draconian, lockdown policy, and a fire broke out in Xinjiang in a residential complex. And because of the constant barricades, the fire trucks never reached on time. And a lot of children lost their lives. Unfortunately, one-child policy. So for those affected, the only children anyways are precious, be it one child or 100 children. That is gone. That struck a chord across the country amongst people, and they came out on the streets with white placards, the white paper revolution. That happened because that's like a do or die. If you snatch away someone's child because of your draconian policies, rather protest and die, do not care after that. That did happen, and the lockdown got reversed. Those sorts of things happen. China once in a while will yield. Yeah, it will think of a lot of different things. This whole thing was across the country. But it's difficult to do this. Surveillance is always there. It's constant surveillance. You can't plan, you can't mobilize. They are inside your computer systems. They're monitoring even your phone calls. They're monitoring your, email exchanges. They're definitely monitoring interpersonal communications, all sorts of things. So that sort of a revolution, unfortunately, I don't see it happening. While it could have been great, I don't see it happening. Tiananmen Square. Yeah, I know it's been a while. That sort of a clampdown can happen. Again, would people take the risk, right? There are protests once in a while because when it's like a do or die situation, people will do it. There are murmurs that there is a competition between Xi Jinping and Chiang Kai-shek. And a lot of purges militarily are also happening. It could mean two things. One, Xi Jinping is preparing for a war, maybe with Taiwan, maybe with India. Unfortunately, India is always the first hit for the PRC, but that's why maybe he wants his military to be his people, or maybe these people were pro Chiang Kai-shek, which is why he got rid of them. It could be either. Given that China is an information black box, it's very difficult to find out. But that being said, the military is weak. Otherwise, if it's not weak, the central military commander wouldn't be purging people and replacing them, which means that yes, there is a weakness, of course. Chang Yoxia as a name is coming up. But who knows what can happen to him. Li Keqiang was a name which was coming up quite often before, the 20th Party Congress. But Li Keqiang died. So he was a more economically rational person. So unfortunately, I don't see that sort of democratic revolution happening because psychological conditioning, that's why they're doing it to Tibetan kids as well. Same sort of psychological conditioning in the colonial boarding schools, right? Also through the usage of Chinese language, right? That they are doing multiple facets of their steps which are taking place together. That democratic revolution, I doubt it's really going to happen anytime soon. Unless it's a do or die situation as it was during the lockdown, wherein people could relate to each other and came out on the streets. That too, Xi Jinping and the CPC stepped back a bit, gave them some concessions. They will do this, some concessions, 1% concessions, 99% repression. I'm speaking logically. I wish I could say that there would be a democratic revolution. Western countries have been predicting a revolution, democracy for forever. But there's a reason as to why it has not happened. China is it takes lessons from its history. The reason why religion is banned in China is also from their history. They don't want, someone, as it happened many, many years ago, to wake up and say, "Oh, I'm the child of Christ." This has happened, and I'm going to free China, take China forward. And well, he got a lot of traction, and there was the Taiping Rebellion, all sorts of those things. So for China, the better option is ban religion. They take lessons and they prepare. Unless one can understand in entirety what the CPC actually is planning, how it is unfolding across domains, I don't think any sort of free society ever is going to happen. We'll just have to live with it and deal with it, given that it's in this monstrous format that it is. So,
right. So thank you so much, Professor, for speaking to Tibettv.
Thank you so much for having me, and fantastic questions. And thank you once again.
Thank you. Thank you for watching this episode of In Conversation with Tibettv. I will see you in the next one.